The biting wind whipped across the desolate expanse of my grandfather's farmland, each gust a chilling reminder of what I was about to lose. They say karma's a bitch, but Sunny Pines HOA was about to learn that vengeance, served generations cold, was far more lethal. News that they were building 99 luxury homes on my inherited land felt like a punch to the gut, but when I unearthed Grandpa Joe's original property surveys, a slow, predatory grin stretched across my face. Their entire opulent development was about to become mine. The bewildered, horrified expressions at their community meeting when I sprung my trap? Priceless. Little did they know, they hadn't just stumbled onto stolen property, they had walked straight into a legacy of righteous fury. I never imagined I'd have to fight tooth and nail for the land that already pulsed with my family's blood. When Grandpa Joe finally succumbed last March, I inherited his 200-acre farm outside Meadow Creek. The old place was more than just land, it was a living, breathing testament to generations of millers. I lived far away, trapped in the concrete jungle with a soul-crushing job that kept me from visiting as often as I should have. Then, the pre-dawn phone call. 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. Mrs. Thompson, Grandpa's neighbor for 40 years, her voice a strangled whisper filled with simmering rage. "They're building, child. Building right on your property." Her voice shook like brittle autumn leaves in a hurricane. "Big, yellow machines started digging yesterday. You need to come quick." At first, confusion gnawed at me. Had construction workers mistakenly crossed a boundary? But Mrs. Thompson, a woman whose words were as solid and unyielding as the ancient oaks on her land, wasn't prone to exaggeration. "The Sunny Pines people, they've plastered signs everywhere. Almost 100 houses, they're planning, where your east fields used to be." Adrenaline surged through me, a potent cocktail of disbelief and fury. I threw clothes into a suitcase, the zipper screaming in protest, and roared towards Meadow Creek, the speedometer needle flirting with triple digits. The 5-hour drive was a blur of white lines and simmering rage. As I turned onto the familiar dirt road leading to Grandpa's farmhouse, a cold dread settled in my stomach. The peaceful, rolling countryside, once a balm to my city-weary soul, was now brutally violated by the guttural roar of heavy machinery. Dust clouds billowed above the trees, a suffocating shroud over my heritage. Cresting the hill overlooking the eastern section of the property, my heart plummeted into my boots, a lead weight of despair. A squadron of bulldozers and excavators were tearing into the fertile soil, the very earth that had nurtured generations of millers. Workers in garish hard hats swarmed the site like locusts, marking the land with aggressive orange spray paint. A monstrous sign dominated the landscape, future home of Sunny Pines East, 99 luxury homes starting at $450,000. I parked my car, the tires spitting gravel, and stalked towards a woman standing apart from the chaos. She was a vision of sterile perfection in spotless beige pants and a crisp white blouse, a stark contrast to the gritty surroundings. Her hair was sculpted into a gravity-defying masterpiece, and she held a clipboard like a weapon while barking orders into her phone. "Excuse me," I said, my voice tight with barely controlled fury as she ended her call. "What in God's name is happening here?" She scrutinized me with a chillingly detached gaze, as if I were some unwelcome pest disrupting her meticulously planned day. "We're preparing for residential development," she stated, her voice polished and devoid of genuine warmth. "Diane Reynolds, Sunny Pines Homeowners Association President." She offered a hand, cool and impersonal. "This is my land," I retorted, ignoring her outstretched hand. "My grandfather, Joe Miller, owned this farm. He passed away recently, and I inherited it." Diane's practiced smile remained fixed, but the icy chill in her eyes intensified. "There must be some misunderstanding. Sunny Pines Development purchased this parcel last year. We have all the necessary permits and approvals." "That's impossible." My voice cracked with disbelief. "My grandfather would never sell this land." "Perhaps he didn't tell you." She sounded almost pitying, a condescending tone that grated on my nerves. "The sale was finalized 9 months ago. We've been planning this expansion for years." My mind reeled, desperately trying to reconcile this impossible scenario. Grandpa had been ill, his body failing him during his final months, but his mind remained razor sharp. He wouldn't have sold his beloved farm, his legacy, without telling me. Something was desperately, terribly wrong. "I need to see those documents," I demanded, my voice gaining steel. "You're welcome to contact our legal department." Diane handed me a business card, her movements precise and dismissive. But I assure you, everything is in order. Now, if you'll excuse me, we have a schedule to maintain." She turned away, already dialing another number, dismissing me as if I were nothing more than a fly buzzing around her head. I stood there, paralyzed by disbelief and simmering rage, as the machines continued their relentless assault on the soil that had fed my family for generations. Back at the farmhouse, Mrs. Thompson waited on the porch, a pitcher of iced tea sweating in the humid air, her face etched with worry. "They started showing up with measuring tools about 3 months ago," she explained, her voice trembling with indignation. "Your grandpa was furious. He kept saying they had no right, that they were trying to steal what wasn't theirs." "Did he mention selling any land?" I asked, my voice tight with suppressed anxiety. "Never, child. Joe swore this farm would stay in your family forever." Mrs. Thompson's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "The day before he went to the hospital for the last time, he was looking through his old office. Said he needed to find something important to protect the farm. Grandpa's office. A time capsule sealed since his death. I hadn't had the heart to go through his things during the whirlwind of the funeral. Now, I desperately needed answers." The small room smelled of pipe tobacco and ancient paper, a poignant reminder of the man who had spent countless hours within its walls. Shelves groaned under the weight of farming almanacs, faded family photo albums, and decades of meticulous records. Grandpa had tracked everything, from rainfall amounts to crop yields to equipment repairs, all recorded in his precise, elegant handwriting. Where would he have kept the property records? The filing cabinet seemed the obvious place to start. I pulled open the top drawer, revealing folders organized by year, each one meticulously labeled. But there was nothing about land sales, nothing about Sunny Pines. Hours passed as I relentlessly sifted through the faded documents, night falling and my eyes burning from the dim lamplight. Just as I was about to succumb to despair, I noticed a loose floorboard under the desk. A surge of adrenaline coursed through me. I pressed it with my foot, and it moved slightly. Kneeling, I pried it open with a letter opener. Inside the small, hidden space was a metal box. A key, hanging from a nail on the underside of the desk, opened it with a satisfying click. Inside the box, I found the deed to the farm, Grandpa's will naming me as his heir, and several yellowed surveys of the property. But the most intriguing item was a letter addressed to me, written in Grandpa's familiar, spidery script. "If you're reading this," it began, "then someone's trying to take what's ours." My hands trembled violently as I devoured his words. Grandpa explained that developers had been eyeing his land for years, relentless vultures circling their prey. They tried to pressure him into selling, but he had always resolutely refused. In his final months, someone from Sunny Pines had visited repeatedly, a slick, charming man claiming to need a simple signature for a road easement, bringing a stack of different papers each time. "I never signed away my land," Grandpa wrote, his words etched with defiant rage. "If they say I did, it's a lie. Look at the original survey from 1910 and compare it to what's recorded at the county now. The truth is in the boundaries." I dug deeper into the box, my fingers brushing against the brittle paper of the original survey. It showed property lines that extended much further than I'd realized. According to this document, Grandpa's farm was nearly 280 acres, not the 200 listed in the current records. Sleep became a distant memory that night. I spread the papers across the kitchen table, the dim light casting long, dancing shadows, comparing the ancient survey with newer maps. A disturbing truth began to emerge. Something sinister had happened over the decades. The eastern boundary had shifted, slowly but inexorably, reducing our land. It wasn't just the area under construction. According to these original documents, we owned land where part of the existing Sunny Pines development already stood. As dawn painted the sky with pale streaks of light, I knew what I had to do. First, I needed a lawyer, someone who could navigate the treacherous legal landscape. Then, I needed to understand exactly what Diane Reynolds and her HOA were up to. If they thought they could steal from my family, they were about to learn a painful lesson. I folded Grandpa's letter and tucked it into my pocket, the paper crackling softly against my skin. "I won't let you down," I whispered to the empty room, my voice resonating with newfound determination. Little did Diane know, she hadn't just messed with a grieving grandchild clinging to sentimentality, she had walked straight into a trap, meticulously set by a man who had anticipated her moves, even from beyond the grave. I didn't sleep that night. By 8 a.m., I was pacing outside the office of Walter Franklin, the only property lawyer in Meadow Creek. His secretary looked surprised when I requested an emergency appointment, but she squeezed me in before lunch. "So, you believe Sunny Pines is building on land that belongs to you?" Walter said after I poured out my story, his voice laced with cautious skepticism. He was older than I expected, with thick glasses perched on his nose and a bow tie that seemed to have been plucked from another era. I spread the documents across his cluttered desk, the faded ink and brittle paper whispering stories of generations past. "These are the original surveys from 1910, updated in 1978. Compare them to the current county records." Walter studied both sets of papers with meticulous care, tracing the boundary lines with a calloused finger. His eyebrows rose higher with each passing minute. "This is highly unusual," he finally said, his voice thick with concern. "According to these original documents, your property extends nearly half a mile further east than what's currently recorded. That would include not just the construction site, but also the existing Sunny Pines clubhouse and about 20 homes built 5 years ago." I finished for him, the words heavy with dread and mounting fury. Walter removed his glasses and rubbed his tired eyes. "A boundary dispute of this magnitude won't be simple. We need to understand how and when these changes occurred in the official record." He called the county assessor's office, putting the call on speaker. After navigating a frustrating maze of bureaucratic departments, we learned something truly shocking. In 1984, a minor adjustment to the eastern boundary was recorded, just a 10-foot easement for utilities. But in 1997, a much larger change appeared, reducing the property by nearly 80 acres. The documentation was sparse, just a form with a signature that barely resembled Grandpa's. "He would have been in the hospital that month," I said, my voice trembling, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with sickening clarity. "Triple bypass surgery. He couldn't have signed this." Walter's expression turned grave. "That would constitute fraud. But proving it after all these years won't be easy." "What can we do?" I asked, desperation clawing at my throat. "File for an emergency injunction to halt construction immediately. Then, petition the court to recognize the original boundaries based on the historic surveys. We'll need a professional surveyor to verify these old maps." As Walter prepared the emergency filing, I realized I needed more ammunition. I drove to the county records office, requesting everything they had on Sunny Pines Development Company. Hours later, hidden in a back corner of the dusty library, surrounded by towering stacks of public records, I struck gold. Sunny Pines wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a complex web of LLCs and holding companies, a tangled mess designed to obscure the truth. The same 6 names appeared throughout: Diane Reynolds, her husband Thomas Reynolds, County Commissioner James Harris, Planning Board Director Mark Wilson, and 2 others I didn't recognize. But the most damning document was from just 3 months ago, a loan approval for $16 million to finance Sunny Pines East, with the land itself listed as collateral, my land. I frantically snapped photos of everything with my phone, the camera clicking like a frantic heartbeat. Then, I headed to my next stop, the offices of the Meadow Creek Gazette, our local newspaper. The editor, Tanya Williams, had known my grandfather for years. When I told her I was investigating potential fraud involving prominent local officials, her journalistic instincts perked up. "I can't publish accusations without evidence," she warned, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of caution and excitement. "But I can look into the approval process for this development." It did seem to move unusually fast. Back at the farmhouse, I found Mrs. Thompson deep in conversation with another elderly neighbor, Mr. Grayson. When I mentioned Diane Reynolds, his face darkened. "That woman is the reason I sold my place," he said bitterly, his voice raspy with resentment. "The HOA fined me every week for unapproved landscaping. I'd been growing those tomatoes for 20 years. Then, they said my workshop violated some rule they just made up. The fines kept coming until I couldn't afford to fight anymore." "Did this happen to many others?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "At least a dozen old-timers sold out in the last 5 years," Mr. Grayson replied, his eyes filled with a simmering rage. "Always for less than market value, always to companies I later found out were connected to those Sunny Pines people. A chilling pattern emerged: fined vulnerable landowners, harassed them with fines and regulations, forced them to sell cheap, develop the land, and make millions. My grandfather had been their latest target, but he had been one step ahead." My phone rang, Walter Franklin's name flashing on the screen. "The judge granted our emergency injunction," he announced, his voice filled with cautious optimism. Construction has to stop immediately until a hearing next week. But brace yourself, this is going to get ugly. I thanked him and hung up, feeling a small flicker of victory. I drove back to the construction site with the court order in hand. The workers were packing up for the day when I arrived. Diane's sleek black SUV still sat near the site office. She emerged as I approached, her phone glued to her ear as usual. When she saw me, her expression hardened. "Construction stops now," I said, handing her the court order. "Legal boundaries are in dispute." She scanned the document, her perfect composure cracking slightly. "This is ridiculous. We have every approval we need. Based on fraudulent boundaries." "I have the original surveys," I retorted, watching her closely. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in her eyes. It vanished quickly, replaced by cold determination. "This little stunt will cost you," she said quietly, her voice laced with menace. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "I do," I replied, the words dripping with icy disdain. 6 names on dozens of business filings. $16 million in loans using stolen land as collateral. County officials fast-tracking approvals for projects they secretly invest in. I hadn't planned to reveal how much I knew, but the look of stunned disbelief on her face was worth it. Diane's perfectly manicured hand tightened around her phone until her knuckles turned white. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "We can be reasonable. Perhaps you'd consider a generous offer for the remaining farmland. 7 figures, immediate payment." "Not interested." "Everyone has a price," her smile returned, confident and predatory. "Think about it. You don't even live here. What do you care about some old dirt? This old dirt has been in my family for 4 generations. It's not for sale." I turned to leave, feeling her eyes burning into my back. As I reached my car, she called out, "Commissioner Harris is my husband's golf partner. Judge Evans comes to my dinner parties. You think your injunction will last? You're nobody in this town." I drove away, her words echoing in my mind. She was right about one thing: I was an outsider, a stranger in this town. But she'd overlooked something important. Grandpa hadn't been. He'd lived in Meadow Creek his entire life, knew everyone, and was respected, even by those who disagreed with him. And he'd left me more than just land. Back at the farmhouse, I returned to his office. If Grandpa had anticipated this fight, what else had he prepared? I searched more carefully, examining every folder, every notebook. In an album labeled Community Picnic 2018, I found dozens of photos of Grandpa with neighbors, local business owners, and families who'd known him forever. Each photo had names written on the back. These weren't just memories, they were connections, people who might stand with me against Sunny Pines. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number: "Parking violation at your property. Fine, $500. Sunny Pines HOA compliance." Attached was a photo of my car parked at Grandpa's farm, my property. This was how it started. The pattern Mr. Grayson had described: harassment by paperwork. But unlike the others, I knew their game now, and I had something they didn't expect: Grandpa's secret weapon, still hidden in his files, waiting for the right moment. As night fell over the farm, I sat on the porch where Grandpa used to tell me stories during summer visits. The eastern fields lay quiet now, construction equipment abandoned under the court order. But this was just the beginning. Tomorrow, Diane would mobilize her connections, pull every string she could find. The real fight was coming. What she didn't realize was that I'd found more than just property surveys in Grandpa's hidden box. I'd found documents that didn't just question the boundary changes, they revealed who had falsified them, when, and why. Diane thought she was dealing with an absent grandchild fighting for sentimental land. She had no idea she was facing the ghost of my grandfather, who had documented every dirty deal and suspicious approval for years, patiently building a case while they thought he was just a stubborn old farmer. The trap was set. All I had to do was let them walk further into it. My heart pounded as I pushed open the glass doors of the Sunny Pines Community Center. Tonight was the night I'd been planning for weeks. Inside, nearly 100 people filled rows of folding chairs. They chatted excitedly about new tennis courts and fancy streets while sipping punch from small plastic cups. At the front, Diane Reynolds stood tall in her bright red blazer, pointing at colorful pictures of sprawling houses on a screen. "Just imagine the swimming pool with its waterfall feature," she said, smiling wide at the crowd. Our homes will be worth so much more once these new neighbors move in. People clapped, a few whistled, completely oblivious to the fact that I carried documents in my folder that would shatter their idyllic world. I took a deep breath and walked straight down the center aisle, my footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. "Excuse me," I said, loud enough to make heads turn. "I need to speak about this development." Diane's smile faltered for a split second, then returned, faker than before. "We'll take questions after the presentation." "This can't wait," I replied, stepping onto the small stage. I faced the curious crowd, my voice ringing with conviction. "My name is Alex Morgan. My grandfather owned Willow Creek Farm for 60 years. The old property we purchased," Diane cut in quickly, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. "Yes, we're very grateful to finally develop that eyesore." Murmurs rippled through the room. I opened my folder and pulled out the first document. "This is the original land survey from 1910, I said, holding it up for all to see. "And this is the updated survey from 1978. I held up another paper. "According to these legal documents, my grandfather's land extends 80 acres farther east than what appears in current county records." I turned to face the HOA board members seated in a row behind the podium. I placed copies in front of each of them, the paper rustling ominously. "Put simply," I continued, my voice gaining power with each word, "you're building on land that legally belongs to me. And not just the new development. According to these boundaries, 20 existing homes and your clubhouse are sitting on my property too." The room exploded with voices. People stood up, chairs scraped against the floor, someone knocked over a punch bowl. "This is ridiculous," Diane shouted, grabbing one of the surveys. "We have permits. We've sold lots. Construction has already started." I stayed calm, letting her rage fuel my resolve. "Your permits are based on incorrect property lines." I filed papers with the court to stop all building immediately. Gerald Fisher, a balding man with thick glasses who served as the HOA treasurer, studied the documents with growing panic. "Diane," he whispered, loudly enough for the microphone to catch, "these boundary markers match the old creek bed. They look real." She yanked the papers from his hands. "This is a kind of trick to get money from us. We'll fight this nonsense." "You're welcome to try," I replied, pulling out one final document. "But here's something you should know. According to these legal boundaries, your house, Diane, sits entirely on what is legally my land." The room went completely silent. People looked at each other, suddenly understanding the gravity of the situation. 20 families might not own the ground beneath their homes. A man in the back stood up, his face etched with worry. "Are you saying we might lose our houses?" Before I could answer, Diane slammed her hand on the podium, the sound echoing in the stunned silence. "This meeting is over. Everyone out. The board needs to discuss this privately." As people shuffled out, whispering nervously, a younger woman touched my arm. "I'm Rachel Winters. I just put my life savings into a lot in a new section. What happens to me?" I hadn't expected to face the human cost so directly, but it only strengthened my resolve. "I'm not trying to hurt regular people," I told her honestly. "This is about fixing a wrong." "Don't listen to a word she says," Diane hissed, suddenly beside us. After everyone else had left, she leaned close to my face, her eyes burning with hatred. "You have no idea who you're messing with. I built Sunny Pines from nothing. Nobody takes it from me." Her threat hung in the air between us as she stormed off, leaving me alone in the empty room. Through the windows, I could see clusters of worried homeowners in the parking lot, their future hanging precariously in the balance. My phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Wallace. "How did it go?" I typed back, "They know now. Get ready for their next move." What I didn't tell him was how shaken I felt. I had lit the fuse, but I wasn't sure if I was prepared for the explosion that would follow. These weren't just paper houses on a map, they were people's homes and dreams. But they had built those dreams on my grandfather's stolen land. Someone would end up losing everything, and Diane Reynolds wasn't going to go down without a fight. I jerked awake to the sound of engines outside my grandfather's farmhouse. Bright headlights flooded the windows. I stumbled to the porch to find 3 white SUVs with Sunny Pines security emblazoned on their doors parked in a row, blocking my driveway. Men in uniforms stood by the vehicles. One stepped forward, handing me a thick envelope. "Cease and desist notice from the Sunny Pines Homeowners Association," he said flatly. You are ordered to withdraw all claims against the development or face legal action. I tore open the envelope. Inside was a letter claiming my documents were fake and that I was attempting to commit fraud. They demanded I pay for damages to the community's reputation. You can't be serious, I said, my voice thick with disbelief. The man shrugged. Just delivering the message. Have a nice day. He returned to his vehicle, but none of them left. I tried to leave for breakfast in town but discovered they had placed large concrete blocks across the end of my driveway overnight. Sorry, sir, one guard said without looking sorry at all. This access point hasn't been approved by the development committee. It's been closed for safety reasons. I was trapped on my property. I called the sheriff's office, but was told they couldn't help with a civil dispute and suggested I get a lawyer. My phone rang. Diane's name flashed on the screen. I hadn't given her my number. Good morning, she said sweetly when I answered. Enjoying the view? This is harassment, I said, my voice trembling with fury. You can't block access to my property. Actually, according to county records, the real ones, that driveway crosses Sunny Pines' common areas. We're within our rights to control access. You know those records are wrong. She laughed, a cold, chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. Let me explain how this works. The county commissioner plays golf with my husband every Sunday. The building inspector's daughter works for my real estate company. The water department supervisor lives in Sunny Pines. I felt my stomach drop as she continued, her voice dripping with venom. By tomorrow, your farmhouse will be cited for at least 15 code violations. Your water might get shut off due to maintenance issues. Local contractors won't return your calls because they know better than to cross me. That's illegal, I said, my voice barely a whisper. That's small-town politics, she replied. You can't win this. But I'm reasonable. Drop your claims, sign over the disputed acres, and this all goes away. I'll even throw in a nice payment for your trouble. This isn't about money, I told her, my voice ringing with defiance. It's always about money, dear. Think it over. You have until tomorrow. She hung up. I stared at my phone, then at the security vehicle still parked outside. They weren't leaving. True to Diane's word, by afternoon, a county inspector arrived to examine the farmhouse. He found problems with everything, the wiring, the septic system, the porch railings. He handed me a list of violations that would cost thousands to fix, all needed immediately. As he left, another truck arrived. Workers put up signs along my property line, future home of Sunny Pines East. Luxury living coming soon. My water pressure dropped to a trickle. When I called the utility company, they claimed there was maintenance work happening and couldn't say when it would be fixed. I tried ordering pizza delivery for dinner. The driver called to say he couldn't find my address, though delivery had never been a problem before. I was being cut off, step by step, isolated and besieged. That night, I sat on the porch in darkness, watching the security lights sweeping across the fields where my grandfather had once grown corn, the earth now scarred by steel and concrete. Their bulldozers sat silent in the distance, waiting to continue destroying his legacy. My phone lit up with a message from Mr. Wallace. They've filed a countersuit, claiming your documents are forged. Court date set for 3 months from now. They'll keep building in the meantime. 3 months. By then, the houses would be half finished. The damage would be irreversible. I scrolled through my contacts, looking for anyone who might help. A name caught my eye, Janet Rivera, a reporter for the local newspaper. We'd gone to high school together. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but maybe. As I considered calling her, headlights appeared on the long driveway. A car carefully maneuvered around the concrete barriers and approached the house. I tensed, wondering what new trouble Diane was sending my way. The car parked, and a familiar figure stepped out, Gerald Fisher, the HOA treasurer who had examined my documents at the meeting. I shouldn't be here, he said nervously, glancing back at the security vehicles in the distance. If Diane finds out. Why are you here? I asked, my voice tight with suspicion. He pulled out a flash drive from his pocket. Because what she's doing isn't right. I've been keeping the HOA books for 7 years. There are things you should see. I invited him inside, away from watching eyes. At my kitchen table, he opened his laptop and showed me financial records, meeting minutes, and emails. Diane and the board have been using HOA funds like their personal bank account, he explained, his voice a hushed whisper. Special fees that disappear. Contracts that go to family members. Reserve funds that get invested inside businesses. Why show me this? I asked, my suspicion slowly giving way to a sliver of hope. Because I'm not the only unhappy homeowner, Gerald said, his eyes filled with a quiet defiance. Many of us are tired of her rules and her control. When you showed up with those property documents, it was the first time I've seen her scared. He pointed to a spreadsheet. Look at these special assessments from last year. Every homeowner paid $2,000 for road repairs. The actual work cost half that amount. The rest vanished. That's theft, I said, my voice filled with righteous indignation. Gerald nodded. And there's more. The 20 homes you said are on your land. The people who live there have been complaining about drainage problems for years. Diane keeps promising fixes, but nothing happens. Now we know why. She knew those houses might not legally belong to the HOA. As we talked, my phone buzzed with texts from numbers I didn't recognize. We support you against Diane. The Millers, 42, Sunny Pine Lane. She fined us $500 for planting vegetables instead of flowers. Can we help? Jackson family. Our children's playground equipment was removed without notice. We want to join your fight. The Rodriguezes. Gerald smiled slightly. I may have shared your number with a few friends. For the first time since this battle began, I felt a surge of hope. Diane had power, connections, and money, but she had also made enemies, many of them. We need a plan, I said, my mind racing. And I think I know where to start. As Gerald left, carefully driving past the security vehicles, I watched a light rain begin to fall on the half-built houses in the distance. Diane thought she was punishing me into submission. Instead, she had just helped me find the allies I needed to win this war. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, I would stop playing defense. My grandfather always said, the best trap isn't one your enemy walks into, it's one they help you build without knowing it. Diane had just handed me the final pieces I needed. My water got shut off yesterday. The electricity arrived this morning. I stood in my grandfather's kitchen, staring at spoiled food in the warm refrigerator, the air thick with the stench of defeat. Diane Reynolds thought she could bully me off my own and by making life unbearable. She had another thing coming. I grabbed my notebook and headed out. If Diane wanted war, I needed allies. The first person I visited was Mrs. Thompson, who answered her door in a flowered housecoat, her eyes wide with concern. They shut off your utilities, she gasped, her voice trembling with outrage. That's illegal. So is building on my land, I replied, my voice hardening with determination. But Diane has friends at the county office. I need to know who else might hate the HOA as much as we do. Mrs. Thompson's eyes lit up, a mischievous glint returning to their depths. Oh honey, grab a chair. This might take a while. She gave me 15 names, families who'd been fined for the wrong color mailbox, elderly couples threatened with liens for having grandchildren visit too often, a single mom who couldn't afford the $900 fee for putting up a small fence to keep her toddler safe. I spent the entire day knocking on doors throughout Sunny Pines. At first, people were scared to talk, their voices hushed with fear, their eyes darting nervously around as if Diane might be hiding behind every tree. But when I showed them my property documents, something shifted in their expressions. Hope replaced fear, anger simmered beneath the surface, waiting to be unleashed. Sarah Jenkins, whose garden had been forcibly removed, invited me in for lemonade, her hands shaking with barely suppressed rage. Diane made my husband dig up our tomato plants because vegetables weren't aesthetically pleasing, she said, her voice barely a whisper. We got a $500 fine. My husband works 2 jobs already. The Patel family had spent $3,000 fighting the HOA over their porch swing. The Johnsons couldn't paint their front door the color they wanted. Every house looked the same, beige with white trim, a soulless landscape of conformity. It's not just the rules, Trevor Martinez explained while his wife Maria nodded in agreement. It's how they enforce them. Diane drives around taking pictures of violations. Some people get warnings, others get instant fines. There's no fairness. By sunset, I had talked to 27 families, all with similar stories, all living in fear of Diane Reynolds. The air crackled with resentment, ready to explode. I picked up my phone and called Mr. Wallace, the weight of their stories heavy on my heart. Can we legally form a competing homeowners association? I asked, my voice filled with newfound resolve. On your land? Absolutely, he replied, his voice laced with excitement. But what about the existing homes? That's where it gets interesting, I said, a predatory grin spreading across my face. I'm going to need the community center for a meeting tomorrow night. Mr. Wallace laughed. They'll never let you use it. They don't own it, I said, my voice dripping with satisfaction. I do. According to my property lines, remember? The next day, I printed 200 flyers, each one a call to arms, emergency community meeting. Your home may be at risk. I included copies of the original property survey, the evidence that would shatter their carefully constructed reality. As darkness fell, the community center filled beyond capacity, the air thick with anticipation and simmering resentment. 97 families showed up, their faces a mixture of hope and fear. People stood against the walls when the chairs ran out, their presence a powerful testament to the injustices they had suffered. Diane arrived last, pushing through the crowd, her face twisted with rage, her eyes blazing with a furious fire. This meeting is unauthorized, she shouted, her voice trembling with indignation. Everyone needs to leave immediately. Sarah Jenkins stood up, her voice ringing with newfound courage. Or what? More fines? Haven't you taken enough from us already? The room erupted in applause, a wave of pent-up anger finally breaking free. I walked to the front, holding up my hands for quiet. I didn't come here to cause trouble, I began, my voice resonating with sincerity and purpose. I came because my grandfather's land was stolen. But after meeting all of you, I realized I'm not the only victim. For the next hour, residents shared their stories of HOA abuse, the dam of silence finally shattered. Tears flowed, voices shook with emotion, years of frustration and resentment pouring out into the open. Diane sat stiffly in the back, tapping furiously on her phone, desperately trying to salvage the situation. Here's what I propose, I said when everyone had spoken, my voice ringing with renewed conviction. We form the Meadow Creek Homeowners Coalition. Together, we negotiate new property lines that are fair to everyone. We create a new community agreement with reasonable rules and transparent finances. You can't do that, Diane shouted, her face contorted with fury. These homes are bound by contract to Sunny Pines HOA. I held up the original land survey, the irrefutable evidence of her deceit. Contracts based on fraudulent property ownership aren't valid, Ms. Reynolds. But I'm not here to take anyone's home. I'm here to fix what's broken. The words hung in the air, a promise and a challenge. The vote was nearly unanimous, a tidal wave of defiance crashing over Diane's carefully constructed facade. 89 families joined the coalition on the spot, their eyes shining with a newfound hope that banished the shadows of fear. As people filed out, energized and emboldened, Gerald Jenkins, his face pale but resolute, approached me privately. There's something you should know, he whispered, glancing nervously at Diane across the room, a viper's figure seething in the corner. The HOA finances, they don't add up. Monthly dues keep increasing, but our reserves are shrinking. I've tried to look into it, but Diane controls all the accounts with an iron fist. I patted his shoulder, offering a silent reassurance. Would you be willing to show me the books? He nodded, the weight of his conscience etched on his face. Tomorrow morning. My office. Diane, a storm cloud of incandescent rage, stomped over, her perfectly manicured fingers jabbing towards my face like a poisoned dart. You've made a terrible mistake. By this time tomorrow, you'll regret ever coming to Meadow Creek. I met her furious gaze with a steady calm, the fire of Grandpa Joe burning in my soul. Is that a threat, Ms. Reynolds? It's a promise, she spat, her voice a low, venomous hiss. I have the county commissioner, the police chief, and the local judge on speed dial. This little rebellion ends now. What she didn't know, what she could never have anticipated, was that I'd invited a reporter from the Meadow Creek Gazette to sit quietly in the back of the meeting. Janet Rivera, a name that probably hadn't crossed her lips since high school, had witnessed everything, recorded every word, documented every threat. As Diane slammed the door behind her, the force of her fury rattled the cheap glass. My phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Wallace. Environmental survey results came in. You won't believe what's on that land. A slow smile spread across my face, a predator anticipating the kill. Diane thought she held all the power, that her connections and influence were impenetrable shields. But Grandpa always said the truth was the most powerful weapon of all, a slow-burning fire that could consume even the most deeply entrenched corruption. And tomorrow, the truth about Sunny Pines HOA, its twisted dealings and self-serving machinations, would be front-page news. I woke up to the jarring sight of police cars surrounding my grandfather's farmhouse, their flashing lights painting the morning mist with an ominous glow. Through the window, I spotted Diane Reynolds standing next to a tall, imposing man in uniform, her posture radiating a smug satisfaction that sent a fresh wave of icy rage coursing through my veins. "Time to face the music," she said, her voice dripping with venomous triumph. "You're trespassing on private property," the police chief announced as I opened the door, his tone accusatory, his eyes hard. I met his gaze with a deceptive calm, the carefully laid trap about to spring shut. "Chief Williams, I believe you'll find I'm the legal property owner." I handed him a carefully prepared folder containing the original land surveys and my grandfather's deed, the weight of generations of truth in my grasp. "These documents haven't been verified," Diane snapped, her mask of confidence beginning to crumble around the edges. "They have actually." A woman stepped forward from a car I hadn't noticed, her demeanor radiating quiet authority. "Carolyn Mitchell, County Records Office. We pulled the original surveys last night after receiving some concerning reports." Diane's face went pale, her carefully applied makeup unable to conceal the fear creeping into her eyes. "What reports?" I gestured towards the farmhouse, a subtle gesture that spoke volumes. "Perhaps we should discuss this inside." "Coffee's ready." 15 minutes later, my grandfather's worn kitchen table, a silent witness to decades of family gatherings, held an unexpected gathering. The police chief, his expression hardening with each passing second. Carolyn Mitchell, the county records clerk, her presence a beacon of integrity. Mr. Wallace, my attorney, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. And Diane Reynolds, her perfect facade dissolving, her growing panic a palpable presence in the room. "The original property lines were improperly recorded in 1973, Carolyn explained, spreading the ancient maps across the table, each crease and tear a testament to their historical significance. This entire area, including the existing Sunny Pines homes and the new construction, legally belongs to the Richards estate." The police chief whistled, a low, impressed sound. "That's quite a mistake." "Not a mistake," Mr. Wallace said quietly, his voice laced with steel. "We have evidence suggesting the boundary change was deliberate." "Ridiculous." Diane slammed her hand on the table, the force of her blow rattling the coffee cups. "This is a scam to extort money from hard-working homeowners." "Speaking of money," I said, my voice dangerously soft, sliding a second folder towards the police chief. "Gerald Jenkins provided these financial records yesterday. 3 years of Sunny Pines HOA accounts." As the chief flipped through the pages, his expression darkened with each passing entry, his eyes narrowed with growing suspicion. "Ms. Reynolds, can you explain why $427,000 in homeowner dues was transferred to Sunshine Consulting LLC?" "That's our legitimate management company," she replied stiffly, her voice trembling slightly. "Registered to your son-in-law," I added, my voice dripping with barely concealed contempt, along with 4 other companies that charge the HOA for services, landscaping, security, maintenance, legal counsel, all going to businesses owned by your family members. The chief closed the folder with a decisive snap, the sound echoing in the tense silence. "Ms. Reynolds, we're going to need you to come down to the station. This is absurd. Do you know who I am?" "My husband plays golf with Judge Harrington every Sunday," she shrieked, her voice rising in hysteria. As the chief led a protesting Diane out of the farmhouse, the sound of her outraged cries fading into the distance, Carolyn turned to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and admiration. "What happens now?" "Those people's homes." "I have no intention of evicting anyone," I assured her, my voice firm and resolute. "But the development needs to stop. Until we can properly survey the wetlands and ensure that the environment is protected, construction is halted." By afternoon, construction had ground to a halt, the heavy machinery sitting idle and silent, monuments to greed and corruption. Local news vans lined the street outside the farmhouse, their satellite dishes pointed towards the sky, ready to broadcast the unfolding drama to the world. My phone rang constantly with calls from worried homeowners, their voices filled with fear and uncertainty. I called an emergency town hall meeting for that evening, the need for transparency and reassurance paramount. The local high school auditorium was the only space large enough to accommodate the anticipated crowd. Nearly 400 people packed the room, their faces reflecting a kaleidoscope of emotions: existing homeowners, construction workers now without jobs, county officials scrambling to distance themselves from the scandal, and curious locals drawn by the unfolding drama. Fear and anger filled the air, threatening to erupt into chaos. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the challenge ahead, and stepped up to the microphone. "My name is Richards," I began, my voice clear and strong, resonating with a quiet authority. "This was my grandfather's land. I didn't come here looking for trouble. I came to honor his legacy." Shouts and accusations immediately interrupted me, the pent-up frustration of the community exploding into a cacophony of voices. "What about our homes? We'll sue. My life savings are tied up in that house." I raised my hands, pleading for calm, the weight of their anxieties pressing down on me. "Please. I'm not here to take anything from you. I want to offer a solution that benefits everyone." The room quieted slightly, a flicker of hope replacing the initial wave of panic. I continued, my voice gaining strength with each word, painting a vision of a future built on fairness and respect. First, all existing homeowners will receive proper legal deeds to their property. No one will lose their home. A collective murmur of relief spread through the crowd, the tension in the room easing slightly. Second, the new development will be redesigned to protect the wetlands that my grandfather cherished. These aren't just swamps, they're critical habitats and natural flood protection for the entire area. I clicked to the next slide, projecting an image of Grandpa Joe's environmental studies onto the screen, his meticulous research revealing the fragile beauty and ecological importance of the land. These wetlands are home to 3 endangered species. Building on them isn't just wrong, it's illegal under federal law. A man stood up, his face etched with worry. "I put my life savings into a lot in the new section. What happens to my investment?" "Fair question," I replied, acknowledging his legitimate concerns. "We're establishing a property exchange program. Anyone who purchased in the protected area can swap for an equivalent lot in the redesigned development. No one loses their investment." For the next hour, I outlined my vision, a community that balanced homes with nature, transparent governance with reasonable rules, and fair fees that went toward community improvements. I spoke of restoring trust, building bridges, and creating a place where everyone could thrive. Toward the end of the meeting, Sarah Jenkins, the woman whose garden had been ripped out by Diane's merciless hand, took the microphone, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've lived under Diane's rules for 8 years," she said, her voice gathering strength with each word. "I couldn't paint my door blue. I couldn't grow tomatoes. My kids couldn't play outside after 7 p.m. because it violated the noise ordinance." She looked around the room, her eyes meeting the gazes of her fellow residents, her voice ringing with a powerful plea. "Is that the community we want?" The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of quiet sobs, a collective release of years of pent-up frustration and depression. By the time the meeting ended, we had over 300 signatures supporting the new Meadow Creek Community Association. Even some of Diane's former allies joined, their eyes open to the truth, their consciences finally awakened. Gerald Jenkins, his face etched with a newfound sense of purpose, agreed to help untangle the financial mess, his expertise invaluable in uncovering the extent of Diane's deceit. The next 6 months weren't easy. Diane, desperate to cling to her power, hired expensive lawyers who tried every trick in the book to overturn our claims, to discredit my grandfather's legacy, to paint me as a ruthless interloper. But the evidence was too strong, the truth too undeniable. She eventually accepted a plea deal on the financial fraud charges, her empire crumbling around her, her reign of terror finally brought to an end. Today, 1 year later, I'm sitting on my grandfather's porch, the sun warming my face, listening to the joyful sounds of children playing in the distance. Kids ride bikes past houses with doors painted every color of the rainbow, a vibrant tapestry of individuality replacing the sterile conformity of the past. The community garden, where Sarah's tomatoes grow tall and abundant, is buzzing with neighbors sharing gardening tips and laughter. Behind me, Grandpa Joe's farmhouse has been transformed into our community center, a hub of activity and connection, where classes, meetings, and celebrations happen daily. The wetlands are protected by a conservation easement, their delicate ecosystem flourishing under our watchful care, with walking trails and educational signs explaining the importance of each plant and animal. Mrs. Thompson joins me on the porch, handing me a glass of lemonade, her eyes sparkling with pride. Your grandfather would be bursting, she says, pointing to where construction has finally resumed on the redesigned development, its low-impact design seamlessly integrated with the surrounding environment. Smaller homes, more green space, solar panels on every roof. I found something while cleaning out his study, I tell her, pulling out a faded notebook, its pages filled with Grandpa Joe's spidery handwriting. Grandpa's journal from 30 years ago. He fought the original developers back then too, when they first tried to build on the wetlands. Mrs. Thompson smiles, a knowing glint in her eyes. He always said you were just like him. Stubborn as a mule when fighting for what's right. In the distance, a blue heron rises from the protected marsh, its graceful wings carrying it effortlessly towards the heavens, soaring above the homes where people now live in harmony with the land, their lives enriched by the beauty and bounty of the natural world. Sometimes, the best trap isn't about catching someone doing wrong, it's about showing them a better way to do right, about transforming a landscape of greed and division into a sanctuary of community and compassion. Diane's HOA tried to steal my land, to erase my family's legacy. But instead, they gave me something far more valuable, a chance to heal a broken community, to honor my grandfather's memory, and to build a future worth fighting for.